And now to local politics and local governance as well. We're looking at the budget debate. So we examined it last week, the opening presentation from Finance Minister Favour Williams. And now we're looking at the opposition's presentations, as well as getting some reactions to the overall budget presentation. So let me introduce you to our panel today. We have joining us economist Dr. Chris Stokes, and we also have managing partner at Signature Creed and Associates, Denzel White. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having us.
Good evening, Kalila.
So Dr. Stokes, you've been on before. Denzel, this is your first time on Taking Stock. Can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Denzel White, as she said, managing partner of Signature Creed and Associates. I actually have more than 34 years of practice in as a tax practitioner in Jamaica. 16 of those years were with government, and the other 16 with the private sector, including banking and KPMG.
Okay, so lots of experience there. Great to have you on. And Dr. Stokes, let's start with you. What were your main takeaways from the government's presentation? And we'll start there and then get into the opposition a little bit later.
Right. The government's presentation was a classic Labour Party budget presentation. It featured stability, even in an election year. So the budget was nominally a little more than last year, in real terms less, 1.26 trillion. So there's no blowing up of the budget to suit any particular need. Very conservative, given the other demands, and we can get into that a little later. It had three aspects, as any Labour Party presentation does. Focuses on stability, which is their big thing, macroeconomic stability. It touched a little bit on social safety net issues. In this case, particularly, raising or proposing the plan to raise the income tax threshold, PAYE threshold, and then touched a little bit. The third thing that they always touch on is a little bit on growth. In this case, they seem to have been focusing on human capital development through the student loan program, and I'm hoping, and I actually expect to hear much more from the Prime Minister when he makes his presentation on growth initiatives. So those are the three things that really has been, for the last little while, their stock in trade, with a heavy emphasis on keeping the ship stable. So no, a couple other little things here and there, but no real surprises from the Labour Party.
Okay, Denzel, for you, I saw that you put out a position paper on it. What stood out?
Thanks, Kalila. I will start where Dr. Stokes ended, where he mentioned the growth initiatives expected to come from the Prime Minister's presentation. I believe both the government and the opposition were focused primarily on growth. Of course, we heard the interpretation of the economic performance from both sides, but growth and economic growth drivers and performance seem to be something that was present in both their presentations. When I considered the initiatives proposed by the new finance minister, congratulations to see a lady in that position for the first time. But the things that stood out for me were the incentives to investors, and particularly non-resident investors, with that big move from a high of 33.33% withholding tax on dividend down to 15%. I had just a week before, called on the government to lower the withholding tax to 12.5%, but they carried it from over 33% down to 15%. That's a big move for investors and attracting capital and increasing the yield of particularly non-resident investors. The other thing that was big from my perspective from the presentation, particularly of the finance minister, was the move to reintroduce accelerated depreciation. Now, that too is another big indicator that the government is moving to incentivize growth. Because on the one hand, they're making investing in Jamaican companies more attractive by lowering the withholding tax rate. But when those companies get the funding, they're making it easier for them to retool, get into investing in better technology, and actually having the reward of the deduction of those investments over a short period, expected to be about 2 years, coming down from the average period of 8 years to recover those funds. On the side of the opposition, the main tax initiative that they proposed relates to the 3-year exemption from corporate, or let me say income tax, since they did say MSME, right, for the first 3 years. That's good, but the weakness on that particular note is that it lacks the accountability that one would get from a stock market, a stock exchange setup. I definitely prefer the micro market argument, because anybody who accesses funds from that route would be under some amount of scrutiny and supervision, and have to actually make their results public over a period of time. So I find both parties reaching for growth initiatives, but the government's proposals seem to be more solid.
Dr. Stokes, you described the JLP's presentation, or Finance Minister Favour Williams's presentation, because the PM hasn't gone yet. You described it as a typical Labour Party budget. Was the PNP's presentation a typical PNP type budget? There were a lot of social initiatives mentioned.
Yes. And before I get into that, we just to throw in the pot the proposal to eliminate the asset tax for banks in exchange for some fees. It may be worth discussing that in a little bit. Now, when you're in opposition, you can ignore the first rule of economics, which is scarcity and choice, right? So you can speak as if you can do everything. We're going to do this, we're going to drop that, and we're going to build this, and so on and so forth. But you don't have the constraint of making it fit within 1.26 trillion, for example. So I think what we saw was not the sort of rigor of fitting into a budget, but an idea and a direction that speaks more to support for persons at the individual level, support for students. It's an old-time PNP thing where you're helping poor people, which is important, and also speaking in general terms about growth and growth initiatives, claiming paternity for stability, and saying that all these things that the JLP is speaking highly about amount to nothing, amount to naught if we're not growing. So in my interpretation, it is easier for the opposition that doesn't have its hands on the wheel to speak more loosely, and I believe we saw some of that. And there are lots of areas to criticize, and I think they're zoned in on a whole bunch of them. Not hearing you.
Sorry. Denzel, anything that stood out in particular from the PNP's presentation, especially today by Mark Golding?
Well, the opposition is in a position to do more, I think, to offer more, promise more. And I didn't see that delivered today. It can be argued actually that the promise to take the income tax threshold to 1.5 million in 2016 was what actually caused the then opposition to come into to government. I was actually expecting more from the presentation of the PM in relation to revolutionizing the economy, or putting something in place in relation to talking more about security. What we heard about was energy cost efficiencies, but they're all general, right? It doesn't necessarily come all the way home to the man on the street. They still have time to reach out to their audience, but I expected more.
Right. So there were quite a few things, the hot button issues that we always expect to hear: student loans, what are they going to do with NHT? Taxes are something that we always hear about as well. And then minimum wage was another one. Dr. Stokes, what do you make of the proposal to shift from a minimum wage to what Mark Golding described as a livable wage that would be tied to the cost of living? Is that feasible?
So one of the problems with studying economics, as I have, is that it removes the opportunity to dream and have rose-colored glasses. I think it's fairly predictable that if you move from a minimum wage to a livable wage, that could be a material increase. I think we may expect less employment because people simply can't afford to pay those wages. We may expect less profitability, especially for smaller companies, smaller, medium-sized companies that we are trying to develop at this stage as major employers in the country. On the plus side, more money in persons' pockets, more spending could be a fillip for the economy. But my suspicion now is that if you say to, for example, the security companies that instead of paying minimum wage, you have to add another 20-30% on that, or any number of persons that hire large numbers of persons, it's going to compromise their profitability. And some may say, well, fine. But a logical outcome is a reduction in the number of people employed and reduction in employment opportunities. Now, we are nominally at full employment. That's another discussion that we can have. Just if you listen to Statin, but I would be extremely reluctant to pursue that. I think those who are able should, and I think the key is to have a competitive labor market so that people who can pay more will pay more, and folks will earn more and do it that way as opposed to by government fiat.
But the minimum wage was increased, I think, last year. It's been increased, and we haven't seen that drastic decline in employment. As a matter of fact, unemployment has gone down.
Right, and so raised a very important point. Now, if you move it from 1 to 110, you may not see anything. You may not see anything at 150. If you move it to 3, that may be the inflection point. And I'm just saying that we have to be careful when we do these things, because you do hit a point that is, what we refer to as an inflection point where it will make a difference. And you remember from the time of discussing the minimum wage that the argument was that many, many employers and individuals are actually already paying more than the minimum wage. All right. So it doesn't bite yet. It doesn't kick in yet until somebody now who used to pay twice the minimum wage, and they're comfortable with that, but now you're saying you have to pay 3 times more, as an example. So there are those inflection points that you have to concern yourself about. But you should recall that at the time when the increase was raised, that many people said, "Look, I'm already paying my help or my security guard or whatever more than that already." So it did not have that inflection effect.
Kalila?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to also comment on one of the winning strategies from the opposition side, which was actually a focus on emerging markets. They spoke of trying to take advantage of the culture factor, the entertainment factor. And I do believe that is something for any government to think about. They need to, in my humble opinion, pick the winners, pick the areas that they believe we as a country have a particular edge in terms of a competitive advantage. And if they focus on feeding and growing the winning industries, I really believe it can have a seriously positive impact on growth. And I'm still on growth because I think the budget this year is all about growth from both sides. But if they want growth, they need to pick winners, support them, create the environment for them to win.
They promised $1 billion for the creative industries, creative businesses. But Denzel, as the tax expert on the panel, you mentioned earlier the raising of the income tax threshold to $1.5 million being possibly what led the JLP to win back in 2016. They are now proposing to raise it to $2 million over the next 2-3 years. Is that proposal feasible? And I've been somebody who's thought from the beginning that they should abolish income tax entirely. Like I expected, especially since it's an election year, that maybe they would have gone there this year.
Well, you're very optimistic, Kalila. Right. But the move now to increase the rate by 100,000 a year is not material, is not anything to write home about. But what I don't like about the move is that the government continues to set the date for the increase in the rate almost in the middle of the calendar year. The calendar year is what the assessment of income tax is for individuals, and it's individuals that benefit from this personal income tax threshold, and it's always a nightmare for the persons who need to calculate their taxes, for the persons who need to change the software to facilitate the calculation of taxes when the nil rate is changed other than on January 1st. Now, with the government having the foresight to point to the years that they are going to increase it, I'd really appeal to them to consider changing at least the 2026 and the 2027 increase dates to coincide with the beginning of the calendar year, which is what individuals are assessed on. I thought that was a weakness in the proposal.
Makes sense. Although politically speaking, they like to make announcements that take effect almost immediately, so you can score those brownie points now, especially in an election year.
But they called it. They have forecasted it, so they have already won in that regard. But don't make it as hard. Don't make it an administrative burden, not only for the administrators, but also for the practitioners and the taxpayers. They have already called it. They have received that those kudos. Restrict it, man. Make it more meaningful and less interruptive by changing the effective date to January 1st. There's also the change in the threshold for registration for businesses from 10 million to 15 million. Now, I would love to see them peg it to a particular US dollar amount. It could be 10,000 US. They are doing this sort of thing in taxation already. It's in place in relation to income tax and what you can recover in relation to private motor vehicles at 35,000 US. So the taxpayers and the can do the calculation. Restrict this registration threshold to a US dollar amount so that it's not up to any government and up to any budget time for it to constantly be changing and persons waiting to see what will happen. I'd love to see that change as well, Kalila.
Well, if they do that, they might as well do it for minimum wage too. Just peg it.
The thing with the minimum wage, like Dr. Stokes, I'd want to agree with him that you need to be more careful with that, because it's not just a matter of a livable wage or a particular percentage. That US dollar amount would need to be taken into consideration with other factors in the economy. The employment rate, unemployment rate and other factors as well. So I wouldn't do the linking for the minimum wage.
Dr. Stokes, a hot issue every single year, every single budget is always NHT. The PNP has said that the JLP continues to withdraw funds from the NHT to support the budget, which they had promised to discontinue as of 2017. They haven't. And then we also have the proposals by the PNP for how they are going to impact workers, lower wages, lower NHT interest rates for public sector workers, suspending payments if you're unemployed. Sorry, that's student loan. 3-month moratorium. Also, the $1 billion Young Owners Deposit Fund, and then this rent-to-own program. What do you think of all of this that was said about NHT?
Okay, so I have mixed feelings. Rent-to-own for sure. I think a focus on getting, and I spent many years in the Building Society movement. I think the focus on getting people into their homes through the NHT is a good thing, a very good thing. All right, it forms a basis for generational wealth. So full marks with the intention there. I think the matter of we call it National Housing Trust. Are these funds actually in trust, or are they just part of the government revenue? That has been litigated. It is part of the government revenue. The government can, without fear of contradiction, access and spend those funds. The question then becomes more of a moral one, or doing what you said you would do. And as things stand currently, there's no shortage of funds in the NHT to complete projects. There are all kinds of other things, affordability, getting things done in time, getting things done in the right areas, and access to land and so on and so forth. So yes to that initiative. We can complain about the government accessing it, but that has been litigated already. I do get a little concerned, when we had a period in time or a point when we removed a number of anomalies from our budget process, including favorable interest rates to certain groups. All right. And I think that, if you talk to the IMF and the World Bank, they don't like to see those things in the economy because they feel it distorts the economy, right? The PNP is proposing to reintroduce preferential rates for public sector employees, which really I think is appealing. Whether or not it will mean that more people will get houses, frankly, is left to be seen. But I think it has a lot of appeal, and it goes in the right direction in terms of a focus on getting people into their homes and forming the basis for generational wealth creation.
And Denzel, what are your thoughts on NHT proposals, re-NHT?
So the opposition proposed to remove the value of land from the sales price, but only in relation to NHT developments. I have a problem with that. I'm not so sure. I know NHT has a lot of money, but I'm not so sure that they are delivering sufficient housing solutions for them to be the vehicle to pass on such a benefit to the final consumer. I would prefer if a system was introduced that would allow some form of rebate or subsidy, or even some tax incentive back to the persons who actually buy a home in the year that they acquire it, but not only from the NHT. I don't see that selective basis of passing on a benefit as being a good thing. I like the rent to home own idea, and I would love to have heard them propose the reverse mortgage, where the seniors can exit with pride instead of coming up short at the end of their years.
Okay. Well, finally, let me ask both of you, what are you hoping to hear from the Prime Minister when he makes his presentation on Thursday, starting with Dr. Stokes?
Yes, I didn't hear you quite clearly, but I suspect you're speaking about the Prime Minister's presentation, if I picked up sufficient there.
Yes. What would you like to hear from the
Growth,
PM on
that is,
Thursday?
yes, yes. It has to be two things. Growth, a growth initiative. There have been a number of false starts over the two administrations of the JP with growth. Now that we can have some confidence that there's macroeconomic stability. And if you think about basketball, when you pivot, one foot must be firmly rooted. We can pivot, but we have to stay firmly rooted in macroeconomic stability. I hope to see far more policy initiatives towards growth. The bigger thing, though, is the quality of implementation, and that this has, on a matter of growth over the two terms, this has actually let the JLP down.
But what are those policy initiatives that could lead to growth?
So there are. Let me just say too. I don't think the government. There is a role for industrial policy where the government can say, okay, we're going to invest in this area or that area. That is fine. I think the biggest role for government, however, is to make it easy for an individual to start a business, get capital, register the business, run a business, fail, and start again. This is what you need in the economy to get young people to come and take a risk. All right, and I think we really need to unleash that power. So I'm not going to say you need to, convert bauxite into aluminum or so on and so forth. The government needs to set the playing field so that it's easy to start a business. People are a trained workforce. Equity capital, not debt. Micro market is important. We didn't speak about that enough. Equity capital, and an opportunity to try decent bankruptcy laws so that failure is not something that you have to live with for the rest of your life, but you can start over. And that infrastructure, I think, is what we need to allow the natural entrepreneurial spirit of the Jamaican to come forth. And I think, the same Jamaican that is doing so well everywhere else will begin to do very well here.
Denzel, what would you like to hear on Thursday?
Okay, so I would love to see a merger of the government's micro market and the opposition's 3-year exemption for MSMEs. One, because the tax exemption would actually make it more attractive for those persons to go to the public rather than go for private credit. And two, the additional scrutiny for having to produce financial statements and make it available to investors, that will keep the micro market owners more accountable. And I'd really love to see that.
Well, the junior market gets a 5-year exemption and then 50% for the next 5 years. So I feel like the micro market should get at least that too.
I agree that there should be some thought in relation to that. And let's keep our fingers crossed to see what the PM will come up with. There's something else I'd love to hear from the PM. A pet peeve that I've been talking about for years, and it's the differential rates in terms of income tax rates for where we have some of our biggest companies and biggest employers, the persons who pay their employees the highest wages are in the financial sector. And the financial sector is under a serious burden. Whereas ordinary companies pay income tax at 17.5%, the financial sector is paying income tax above 33%. Now it's almost double. And then they're under serious regulation. I'd love to hear from the government a plan to lower the tax rate on those financial services firm, and consider that in our near markets, the companies that our financial services firms are competing with in US, in the Caribbean, they're not paying those rates. And if we really want to be world class, we need to stop pressuring those who are facilitating scale. I believe that one of the easiest way to actually increase efficiency is to encourage scale. We shouldn't have a situation where scale, because they make a lot of money collectively, because there's a lot of investment and a lot of investors that have to put together to make this money, they're being penalized by almost double the rate of income tax. I'd love to hear a plan to lower the income tax rate on the biggest companies in the country over a period of time, with the understanding that it will cause more business to be in Jamaica. It will cause some of those very companies right now to expand in Jamaica rather than looking to expand in Cayman and Barbados and some of the other countries that have better rates of income tax.
Interesting. Well, we look forward to that presentation on Thursday, and of course we will be here reporting on whatever is announced Thursday, and then when the finance minister wraps up next week on Tuesday. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, Denzel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kalila.